I want to thank everybody for joining us for today's webinar entitled Computer Systems Validation, Best Practices, and Navigating Challenges. This is brought to you by Astrix Technology. You can go to the next slide, please. Before we get into the actual session, I want to take a moment to explain a little bit about Astrix. If you've not attended any of our webinars before or had any direct interaction with our organization, it'd be useful to know who we are and what we do. From a snapshot standpoint, we're an informatics professional services and strategic outsource solutions company dedicated to serving exclusively the scientific community. And some quick stats about the company. We were established in 1995 and are privately held today. We originated as the IT division of APBI Life Science Research Organization. We operate from 7 offices today in the United States and beautiful Costa Rica, and our headquarters are in Red Bank, New Jersey. We focus on helping companies in certain sectors, such as Fortune 1000 life science enterprise, chemical, CPG companies, government and research institutions, all generally speaking with large and fast-growing IT or outsourced and compliance needs. And the mission of the company, as has and always will be, to deliver scalable, sustainable solutions to the scientific community. You go to the next slide, please. And in terms of the different services that Astrix can get, we're not a software company, we're a services company. And as such, what we do is we go in and we help companies with the complete life cycle of their scientific data systems. And that, from the beginning, that's things like business process analysis and enterprise architecture. Basically, those services are very high level. They're where we come in and we kind of help an organization understand what their technology stack should look like based on the type of laboratory they are, the type of work that they do, the skill sets they have on staff, et cetera, et cetera. It's basically trying to kind of map out, the future of what their overall technology should be. And it could be, in certain cases, an exercise where we help migrate somebody from, a traditional land-based software to cloud-based software. From there, we'll go through selection services. We can help select the right technologies. We're vendor agnostic. We're not aligned with any one or group of software vendors. We go out into the market and we help pick the right tools based on your unique needs. That way you don't have to become experts in software selection. You leave that to us. We also can help with development implementation. And then, of course, we're going to talk about validation today. We also do computer systems validation. When that process is all done, there are services that we have on the back end, which basically are what most people refer to as what are called managed services. So managed services are where we can provide ongoing services to care, feed, and maintain your technology stack, everything from upgrades to training, et cetera, and then to even staff it, right? So if you need people on staff to handle the IT side, or if you even need to go out and bring scientific professionals on staff, we have a division that helps with that. So that's kind of the scope of everything we do. Let's move past that and talk a little bit about who's going to be presenting to you today. So we can go to the next slide, Christian. And I will introduce Christian Del Val. He's the director of CR operations here at Astrix, and CR being Costa Rica operations, where he basically manages a multidisciplinary group that is engaged in scientific software development, customized support solutions for Astrix customers. So kind of on that back end side of the services that we just talked about. He brings over 15 years of experience in the laboratory informatics and scientific software market. And he's played several key roles in the delivery of informatics services and solutions to a lot of our commercial and academic institutions. So with that, Christian, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you, and I'll come back on at the end.
All right. Thanks, Kevin, for having me today. And welcome everybody to today's webinar about computer system validation, best practices, and navigating challenges. So let's jump into the agenda. All right, so I will start with a few definitions to set the stage for this presentation. And then I will walk through the validation process, highlighting challenges and best practices. So what is computer system validation? Well, here are a few definitions that will help us have it clear before we jump into the process. So the FDA defines software validation as confirmation by examination and provision of objective evidence that software specifications conform to user needs and intended uses, and that the particular requirements implemented through software can be consistently fulfilled. On the other hand, computer system in the FDA-regulated laboratory refers to computer hardware and software and equipment and the instruments connected to the system, as well as the users that operate the system and the equipment using SOPs and manuals. And lastly, computer system validation is a documented process, right? Required by regulatory agencies to verify that the computerized system does exactly what it is designed to do in a consistent and reproducible manner in order to ensure a product safety and effectiveness. So computer system validation is required when configuring a new system or making changes in a validated system, upgrades, patches, extensions, you name it. So here is a general SDLC process used broadly to implement new systems in a lab or company. And typically, validation has been run as an intended or unintended, quote unquote, waterfall context, in which the complete validation process was inserted just before deployment or even go live to make sure the system is validated at production time. The main reason for that is, well, validation was meant to produce objective evidence of those features that are present in a ready, in the system, right? And we're thought logical at that point to start validation after the system is bug-free or production ready. This means there is a heavy lifting all at once to validate the system. So working this way produces delays in production and go live dates as the validation team starts to look at requirements late in the SDLC process. And this could have started sooner, right? So requirements may not be always clear and sometimes could be even cryptic to the team who developed them, which could also impact the validation assessment and test script creation. I have seen, for example, teams under stress running to cross the line, or people trying to kick validation down the road to avoid having to deal with it until it's no longer an option, right? But nowadays, this process is not optimal, right? Instead, the validation should run alongside the SDLC process, so planning can start earlier. Validation assessment can happen as soon as each feature becomes available, and stakeholders are also available to assess correctly. Validation test cases can be drafted as soon as each requirement becomes part of the validation scope. When developing features, then validation assessment is complete and approved right after code freeze, and all the validation test cases are ready for approval as expected before execution. Having said that, let's take a closer look at the validation process. Okay, so the planning phase, it sets the structure for the validation process, right? It defines objectives for validation, scope and limitations, right? A validation plan can have a narrow scope, as for example, lab software and peripherals only, or network and security, or applications consumed as software as a service, for example. Or it can be a master validation plan that incorporates details for a broader scope, right? If the scope has validation limitations, those must be expressed in the plan. And as needed, references to other documentation that help you cover those areas. Then the validation process. This describes all the pieces of the validation process and the order in which they should be executed. It includes the approach for maintaining validation status over the full SDLC. All planning should be documented to avoid dealing with changes that could have been solved with better planning and preparation. You don't want to hear that at the end of the process, right? You better have a good planning right at the beginning. And it can also cover documentation, standards for requirements, running a validation assessment, test scripts, writing style, and best practices, control execution practices, variance reporting, general summary reports, CAPA guidelines for validation, right? And then we go into roles and responsibilities. This helps define who is responsible for what. Then the validation deliverables. This lists all the deliverables that a validation process must have generated at the end. And then during planning, we can also start a validation assessment, right? So if you remember the previous slide aligned with SDLC, most of the time requirements are already in place when you start this planning. So you can start early and work. I mean, you can work here with your dev environment and your dev team to review the requirements and make sure those are clear. The assessment defines which requirements are in scope for this particular validation, for example, and could be based on risk assessment and gap assessment. So let's look at common challenges here. Drafting the validation plan, right? Defining the scope of the validation plan is key. The plan cannot be defined in isolation. The scope will help you identify the stakeholders for the entire process. Including stakeholders during the initial planning will help avoid unanticipated events. Have the stakeholders contribute to the creation of your validation plan. Walk through the process. Describe the preparation, not just the execution. And this will help you ensure gap and risk assessment involves the proper people. Avoid rework on test scripts due to lack of clarity on requirements. Reduce execution variances due to unstandardized test scripts. Avoid setbacks from not planning properly for the environment to be used to drive around the test cases, like test users, access, operating permissions not set correctly, right? And then your validation platform may have its own challenges. Whether you have a special classical paper, digital, hybrid validation process in place, all have challenges. For example, well, it started with a paper platform. I haven't seen one of those in a while, but the requirements were around storage and accessibility, and all those mainly resolved with SharePoint or some more specialized systems. Then the hybrid one is the most common, I think, where all tracking and reporting is digital, but the test case execution is manual with wet signatures and everything scanned into PDFs. And typically the templates and all the validation deliverables are packaged and stored in version control environments or platforms. And then the digital validation, here I have seen two branches. Execution over PDF with certificate signatures, or execution of the test cases on specialized testing software like Zephyr or ALM, to name a few, that uses user credentials and system audit trail instead of wet signatures. And then last one, automation, right? This one has more challenges because of the time required to produce the scripts and to validate the actual scripts even when they result as pass, and maintaining the scripts in some instances. A key benefit from automation during maintenance is that your scripts are, if your scripts are maintained, and you expect no changes in many areas after a patch, for example, you can dry run the automated test cases even for low risk items with low impact on schedule. If incurring into automation, well, my advice here is just make sure all the test scripts are written in a human, comprehensive, readable format. This will help you review the executions, and it will also help you if, in case you need to execute manually, you don't need to maintain a second set of scripts. So nowadays, more vendors have introduced automated testing to speed up their own development cycles. Therefore, they have built-in better objects identifiers in their code to help ease the automation scripting process. In any case, proper documentation of the process to create, execute, and maintain the test scripts will help your team navigate smoothly over the process. And then, well, how can you use validation kits from your vendor? There are a few vendors that provide them, and not all of them. Vendor validation kits vary from vendor to vendor. Some validation kits contain test scripts, FOQs and PQs, and may even include executed OQs that cover a comprehensive set of their product functional requirements and their respective traceability matrix. Some others concentrate mainly on regulatory requirements. So here, a gap analysis will help you identify what is covered by the vendor scripts and what needs to be created on your end. A risk assessment will help you identify which requirements must be validated and if you need to re-execute a set or a subset of the vendor's test scripts, right? Validation kits can help a lot, but they can't just be accepted blindly. You need to review them. Okay. So if you are trying to validate a system hosted outside your organization and managed as software as a service, for example, here are a few things that you need clarity before you can plan validation. How much deployment control you have on production and test environments. How are changes moved from a test environment to production? How frequent will operating system security and vendor system patches be deployed? And will you be forced to keep a patching pace? How your vendor hosting the solution can help you keep the validated status? And what is the disaster recovery strategy, as well as backup and archiving? So knowing the answers of these questions will help you plan your validation strategy. If you have full control over the system, then the plan will be similar to validating on-premise. But if you have a shared responsibility to maintain the change control, review your vendor reports and validation and plan accordingly to close any gaps. All right. So the next phase in the validation process is prepare. And here are common activities we typically see. Template creation. Well, here is where the templates are created and approved, right? OQs, PQs, requirement, traceability matrix, variance templates, validation, summary reports, UAT, etc., right? Then the validation team is trained and in the complete process at this stage. So it covers test script training, right? Test scripting training, and even the execution as well, right? Then the environment for dry run and execution is prepared, and the test scripts are drafted, then they are dry run and finalized. And then the templates and the test cases are approved. And at this point, all development is completed as well, right? So you're ready to enter the next phase. But before that, let's look at challenges. The most underestimated activities in this stage are training and communication, I would say. Training, the validation team is essential. Validation testing has many details and need to be in place and followed on every test case execution. Your team may have different backgrounds or different levels of experience. Just make sure they are all on the same page and keep the communication through the entire process. Training your validation team using the validation plan is key. So you make sure that they know the big picture, right? And the details of their responsibilities. Cover best practices for executing an assessment, test case drafting, reviews, and execution, right? Then the test scripts creation, validation of the test cases must be clear, right? So the test cases need to be easy to read, right? Easy to follow. They need to be clear. Avoid different writing styles, right? This impacts test case execution as well as audits. Dry runs. Well, here have a second person run the test cases to ensure clarity of each of the test cases steps. And dry run results, well, usually the results only challenge the test scripts against the system. And these results typically have three possible outcomes: A being test passes, B being test fails because of test scripts issues, and then here you need to make corrections and implement those corrections before your next run. And then C will be test fails because the system requirements are not met. And here you need to update the IQs so these issues are not seen during the official execution. So these tests are run in a fast pace without detailed documentation. I mean the dry runs, right? So tester errors are usually not visible until the official execution. So try to review how to properly document test case executions before the official run. Okay, so during the execution phase, all the attention is put on the official test case execution. At this point, you also have a validation environment in sync with the production environment. IQs are executed before OQs and PQs as instructed by your validation plan. And test cases are assigned to testers. Testers verify prerequisites and execute each step, collecting evidence and observations as instructed, right? And completing the OQ and PQ and UAT in order to comply with the specifications of your validation plan, right? All the instructions in there. So what are the challenges here? Well, if the plan and preparation were correctly executed, then this stage should not present significant challenges. In contrast, gaps or weak points in your previous stages can lead to delays and rework, right? So here, avoid blockers by ensuring the system to validate has all the IQs properly run before the validation execution starts. Assign test cases for execution the same way as you did when doing dry run, because officially executing unfamiliar test cases can lead to delays or variances that you will have to deal with later. And start and finish executing each test case in a single stretch. So evidence is not obscured by the activity of other test cases. Okay. All right. So let's move into review and closeout stage. All right. Review all test case executions. Investigate all unexpected observations. Document all variances found. Execute kappa as needed to resolve the variances. Verify all the activities are completed. Verify all deliverables are finalized. And produce and finalize the validation summary report. And lastly, produce and deliver the system release documentation, which documents that the validation activities are complete and the system is available for intended use. So these are the common activities of this stage. Regarding challenges, the review will be smooth depending on how the execution goes, right? So dealing with variances that require kappa actions is the most critical part of this stage, as resolving them could delay crossing the finish line on time. In general, validation is an action to grab evidence of features that are in place, right? So if they are there, then all the planning and preparation and even the execution are meant to succeed. So this means you could have no variances, right? But there are always minor observations as your team members want to be productive, right? They want to flag all the different things that they find there. So review those observations. This can help you improve different things, like the validation master plan that will be used once you enter in change control mode, right? The different deliverables, like templates, right? Validation training as well, and even minor improvements of your test scripts. Lastly, here you would have entered the last stage, right? The change control phase. The validated system is now live at this point, and the system and its validated status need to be maintained. So any future changes need to follow the validation plan process for change control with similar stages as before, which will look something like this. The plan here, the validation plan for change control details should be reviewed and updated as needed. So follow the plan for new changes. For example, review the risk management guidelines you have. Run a validation assessment on new changes to define how these changes impact the existing functionality and your documentation. The traceability matrix, the OQs, the PQs, the UAT, right? Know what test cases need to be updated, how many more test cases are required to cover the new functionality, for example. And then the prepare, well, prepare as you did during the initial deployment, but at this point, you already have the templates. So preparation is concentrated on retraining your team, right? Maybe you have new members. Maybe it's been a while since you run a validation and you need a refresher, right? Follow the recommendations that resulted from the validation assessment. Update test cases, create new ones as needed, update all the impacted documentation that resulted from your validation assessment, right? And then you go into execution mode again, right? So you follow the plan as before, and then review and release. making sure that all deliverables and activities are complete and the system is available again for intended use, right? And then just repeat the cycle for each future change that you'll have in the system, right? You go into plan, prepare, execute to just make sure you are deploying those features in a validated fashion to your users. So that concludes what I had for you. So let's jump into a few takeaways. First of all, computer system validation has many details, and trying to run it all at once before go live is not ideal, right? So try to start early and work in collaboration with your SDLC team. Then identify the stakeholders for the validation process and include them from the beginning. This will make things a lot easier. Communication and good planning set the success for the rest of the project, right? If you do good here, then you're going to have good results, as well as keeping good documentation. This helps everyone in the process, right? The preparation, the execution, and even audit, right? It can help an audit go smooth. Then improve the process as your business and technology evolve, right? Whether your business decides to, I don't know, move to the cloud or something else that comes up, update your validation plan so you keep the validation status at all times. All right. Well, thanks all for having me today. And I think I'm open
Yeah,
for questions.
appreciate that. And before we get into that again, I want to thank you for some really great quality content there, Christian. Much appreciated. And we're going to do a couple things here. One, I'll get the recording stopped.